In the dark days of 1938, as Europe slid toward war, the British Air Ministry sought new bombers, faster, heavier, and armed to the teeth. Yet deep inside the workshops of de Havilland Aircraft Company, one man had a different vision. His name was Geoffrey de Havilland, and he believed that speed, not armor, was the key to survival. While most aircraft designers built from metal, de Havilland proposed something that sounded like madness: a high-speed bomber made almost entirely of wood. To the generals, it was laughable, a toy plane, they said, unfit for combat. But to de Havilland and his engineers would meant freedom. It was light, abundant, and it didn't demand scarce metals Britain needed for Spitfires and Hurricanes. They called the idea the wooden wonder. At first, the Air Ministry rejected it outright. They wanted defensive guns, heavy plating, and multiple crew members. De Havilland countered with a radical idea: why not build a plane so fast that it would never need guns? Work began in secrecy at Hatfield, a small factory north of London. The frame was crafted from birch, balsa, and plywood, layers of nature turned into engineering genius. As Europe erupted in flames in 1939, the Mosquito took shape under the dim glow of hangar lights. Carpenters, furniture makers, and even piano craftsmen joined the effort, transforming peacetime skills into instruments of war. By late 1940, the prototype stood ready, sleek, elegant, and unlike anything the world had seen. When test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. climbed into the cockpit for its first flight on November 25, 1940, even the skeptics watched in silence. The twin Merlin engines roared to life, and the wooden aircraft leapt into the air with astonishing grace. Observers on the ground were stunned. The Mosquito climbed faster than a Spitfire, flew higher than most fighters, and cruised at nearly 400 miles per hour, with no guns, no armor, and no escort. It was a ghost in the sky, invisible to radar and impossible to catch. When the results reached the Air Ministry, the tone changed overnight. The same officials who had dismissed the concept now demanded production, immediately. Within months, de Havilland's workshops were turning out Mosquitoes for reconnaissance, bombing, and even night fighting. The plane was a masterpiece of simplicity and speed. Its wooden skin absorbed radar signals, baffling German detection. It could carry a bomb load equal to the early B-17s while flying almost 100 miles per hour faster. It was more than an aircraft, it was a statement. Britain would fight back with ingenuity, not just firepower. As war raged over Europe, the Mosquito was still a mystery to the enemy. The Luftwaffe had no idea what they were up against. They'd soon learn. When their pilots tried to chase this phantom through the clouds, only to watch it disappear into the horizon. The Mosquito had been born, not from steel or brute strength, but from imagination, courage, and the hands of ordinary craftsmen. A wooden dream that would become the nightmare of the German skies. In 1940, as Britain stood alone against the rising storm of Nazi power, every decision made in London's War Office carried the weight of survival. The Royal Air Force had already paid in blood during the Battle of Britain, and its commanders were desperate for proven machines, not risky experiments. When Geoffrey de Havilland and his team presented the Mosquito to the Air Ministry, the reaction was far from enthusiasm. Senior officers and politicians stared at the wooden model with polite disbelief. A bomber with no guns? No armor? Made of plywood? They murmured. To them, the idea seemed not only foolish but suicidal. Air Chief Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman was one of the few who saw potential. Yet even he faced pressure from within the establishment. Many insisted that modern war demanded metal and firepower. The logic was simple: the heavier the bomber, the safer the crew. To suggest otherwise bordered on heresy. Meanwhile, factories across Britain were already overloaded building Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Wellingtons. The ministry feared that a wooden aircraft would drain resources, confuse logistics, and distract from the proven designs already in battle. Some even called it a luxury project, at a time when every rivet and gallon of fuel mattered. But Freeman refused to give up. He quietly approved a prototype, authorizing de Havilland to proceed under limited funding. Even then, the design team faced endless bureaucratic delays. Engineers were forced to scavenge materials, and skilled carpenters were recruited from furniture workshops and piano companies, men who had never built a warplane before. Throughout 1940, de Havilland's engineers fought not only physics but politics. Every setback became ammunition for the skeptics. "You can't win a war with wood," one general famously scoffed. But as the German Luftwaffe bombed London night after night, the Mosquito's promise, a fast, high-altitude bomber able to outrun danger, seemed more valuable than ever. The turning point came with a bold demonstration flight. In the summer of 1941, de Havilland's prototype was summoned to show its capabilities before top RAF officials. The morning sky was gray over Hatfield as the Mosquito lined up on the runway. When the twin Merlins screamed to life, the crowd expected a modest display. What they saw instead left them speechless. The wooden plane soared into the air, climbing faster than any fighter they could send after it. It roared past the stands, engines thundering, then looped and rolled with effortless precision. When it landed minutes later, the test pilot simply smiled and said, "Gentlemen, I believe that answers your question." Word spread quickly. Suddenly, the toy plane became the most discussed project in British aviation. Freeman was vindicated. His faith in the unorthodox had paid off. Yet even then, full-scale production approval took time. The Air Ministry's old guard was slow to admit that their assumptions about weight, defense, and even materials were wrong. Still, the Mosquito's performance could not be ignored. The skeptics had to face an uncomfortable truth. The future of warfare might belong not to the heaviest bomber, but to the fastest. And in that realization, Britain's wooden Phantom began its rise from dismissed curiosity to one of the deadliest and most versatile aircraft of the war. From that day on, the laughter faded. The men who once doubted now watched in awe as the Mosquito proved that imagination could outfly fear, even in the darkest days of the war. The winter of 1940 was cold and uncertain. Britain had survived the Battle of Britain, but the Luftwaffe still ruled the skies over Europe. Deep inside de Havilland's Hatfield airfield, something extraordinary waited in silence. The first Mosquito prototype, tail number W4050. Built from layers of birch and balsa, its smooth, pale frame looked fragile compared to the metal monsters of the time. Yet hidden within that wooden skin lay power, speed, and a dream no one else dared believe. On the morning of November 25, 1940, the airfield was slick with frost. Engineers huddled near the runway as Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., son of the company's founder, climbed into the cockpit. There were no guns, no armor, no escort, just twin Merlin engines and faith in a radical idea. When the throttles opened, the air itself seemed to tremble. The Mosquito surged forward, wheels lifting free from the earth with effortless grace. Observers held their breath as the aircraft climbed higher and higher into the gray sky. The sound of the Merlins echoed across the countryside, smooth, powerful, and hauntingly pure. The test lasted only 30 minutes, but it was enough to change everything. The prototype handled beautifully, reaching speeds close to 400 miles per hour. At that moment, the skeptics' laughter began to fade. In the following weeks, more tests were flown. Engineers pushed the Mosquito harder, faster, higher. It responded like a racing stallion, agile, confident, unstoppable. The Air Ministry officials who had once dismissed it now stood at the edge of the runway, speechless. Could fly faster than the Spitfire, higher than the Hurricane, and carry the same bomb load as a Wellington. But unlike them, it needed no gunner, no armor, only speed. Reports began to circulate through RAF headquarters. Pilots described it as the smoothest aircraft ever built. Mechanics marveled that its wooden structure required no rivets, no heavy welding, just craftsmanship and glue. In an age obsessed with steel, this humble material had produced the fastest operational aircraft on Earth. When the Mosquito's performance results reached the German intelligence network, disbelief followed. German analysts suspected British exaggeration. Surely a wooden aircraft could not outpace their best fighters. But within months, Luftwaffe pilots would learn the truth. The Mosquito could appear out of nowhere, strike with precision, and vanish before their radar even caught up. For de Havilland's team, those early test flights were more than success. They were vindication. The pilots who flew it felt as if the aircraft were alive, anticipating their every move. The Mosquito was light on the controls, perfectly balanced, and astonishingly stable even at top speed. One engineer recalled, "It was like flying a whisper. You didn't command it, you danced with it." By early 1941, the prototype had exceeded all expectations. The RAF now faced an entirely new question. What kind of aircraft was this? A bomber? A reconnaissance plane? A fighter? The answer, as history would prove, was all of them. The Mosquito could adapt to nearly any role, from photo missions over Berlin to precision bombing raids that stunned the German high command. But at that first flight, none of that was certain. All they knew was this: the impossible had flown. A wooden dream had become a living force of war. As the Mosquito touched down after its final test that winter day, the small crowd erupted into applause. De Havilland Jr. stepped out of the cockpit, grinning through the cold wind. "She's perfect," he said simply. And with that, the legend of the Mosquito took flight, a silent promise that Britain's spirit, like its newest aircraft, could never be caught. By 1942, the war in the skies over Europe had become a relentless duel. The German Luftwaffe dominated by day, its fighters and bombers striking with ruthless precision. But high above the clouds, a new ghost had begun to appear, small, sleek, and impossibly fast. The Germans had no name for it yet. To British crews, it was the Mosquito. At first, German radar operators were baffled. Their screens flickered, showing a target for only a moment before it vanished. Ground observers reported a twin-engine aircraft flying at extraordinary speeds, too high for their Messerschmitt Bf 109s to intercept. Reports poured in from France, the Low Countries, and Norway. An unarmed wooden plane that seemed to appear and disappear at will. The Luftwaffe command dismissed the stories as exaggeration. Hermann Göring himself reportedly laughed at the idea that a wooden English toy could outpace his fighters. "If the British are building wooden aircraft," he scoffed, "then we have already won the war." But the laughter would not last. On daylight raids over occupied Europe, the Mosquito began to prove itself in deadly fashion. Flying alone or in small formations, it struck precision targets that the heavy bombers of the RAF could never reach without terrible losses. Factories, rail yards, and Gestapo headquarters fell victim to lightning-fast attacks. German defenders scrambled their interceptors again and again, only to arrive at empty skies. For the Luftwaffe pilots, it was infuriating. They would catch a glimpse of the Mosquito's silver outline glinting in the sun. Then it was gone. Even their fastest fighters, the FW-190s, could barely close the distance before the British aircraft disappeared into cloud cover. One German pilot described it bitterly. "You'd see it once, like a flash of light, and then your instruments told you the truth. It was already gone." As reconnaissance versions of the Mosquito flew deep into German territory, the problem grew worse. These photorecon Mosquitoes flew higher than any interceptor could reach. They crossed the Rhine, photographed Berlin in broad daylight, and returned safely, sometimes before German air defenses had even sounded the alarm. The photos they brought back were so detailed that Allied planners could count vehicles in city streets. Inside Luftwaffe intelligence offices, panic began to replace disbelief. Reports confirmed that the aircraft's wooden structure made it nearly invisible to radar. Anti-aircraft gunners complained their shells couldn't track it fast enough. It was as if the British had built a ghost. Göring's anger became legend. In one furious outburst, he shouted, "The British, who can't even make enough aluminum, have the audacity to build a plane that can fly rings around our fighters. It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green with envy." By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe had issued orders to capture or destroy a Mosquito at all costs. Special high-altitude versions of the FW-190 and Bf-109 were developed to chase it, but few ever succeeded. The Mosquito was simply too fast, too agile, and too far ahead of its time. What began as a dismissed experiment had now become one of the most feared aircraft in the German war reports. The wooden bomber had humiliated the Reich's proud Air Force, not through brute strength, but through brilliance. For German pilots, the Mosquito became a haunting presence, a phantom that struck from nowhere, mocked their pursuit, and vanished into the clouds. And for the Allies, it was a sign of hope, proof that ingenuity could outfly tyranny. The Luftwaffe had finally noticed, but by the time they did, it was already too late to stop the wooden wonder. The winter of 1942 marked a turning point in the air war over Europe. For the first time, the Mosquito, that strange wooden aircraft the Germans had mocked, began to meet the Luftwaffe face to face. What followed were encounters that stunned both sides and reshaped the way the enemy viewed the skies. The first recorded combat engagement took place over the coast of Norway. Two Mosquito BMK, 4 bombers of RAF No. 105 Squadron had been assigned to strike German shipping near Oslo. As they descended through low clouds, radar stations along the coast picked them up, and within minutes, German fighters scrambled to intercept. The Luftwaffe pilots, flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s, expected an easy kill. What they found instead was something entirely new. When the German fighters dove to attack, the Mosquitoes simply pulled away, climbing faster, flying higher, and vanishing into cloud banks before the enemy could close in. The German commander's after-action report was short and bitter. Impossible to intercept. Aircraft too fast. In the weeks that followed, similar encounters took place across France and the Low Countries. Mosquitoes struck rail yards in Rouen, shipyards in Rotterdam, and Gestapo offices in The Hague, all in daylight, without escort. Luftwaffe interceptors were launched again and again, but their pilots could only watch the strange wooden planes streak past them like phantoms. For RAF crews, the missions were exhilarating and terrifying. They flew in pairs or alone, trusting only in their speed and precision. There was no armor to save them if they were hit. Many pilots described the sensation as riding lightning. Every second mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. Yet the Mosquito's agility gave them confidence. They could dive, roll, and climb with a grace no bomber had ever possessed. One of the most daring early raids occurred in September 1942, when a formation of Mosquitoes attacked the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. The timing was perfect. The bomb struck just as senior German officers were meeting inside. The building was heavily damaged, and German morale took a sharp blow. Not a single Mosquito was lost. Göring was said to have flown into another rage, demanding to know how his mighty Luftwaffe had been humiliated by a wooden bomber. As more missions followed, the Luftwaffe began to realize the scale of the problem. Their best fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, could catch the Mosquito only in a dive, and even then only if conditions were perfect. Radar operators struggled to track them, Their wooden frames absorbed signals, confusing early warning systems. To the Germans, it was as if the British had built a machine that defied the laws of war. The Mosquito's reconnaissance variants soon added insult to injury. They flew alone, unarmed, straight over Berlin in broad daylight, photographing military sites with absolute precision. On one occasion, Mosquito cameras captured Göring himself inspecting damage from a previous air raid, an image that infuriated him when he later saw it. For Allied commanders, these early encounters proved the Mosquito's worth beyond any doubt. It was more than just a bomber. It was a symbol of Britain's resilience and ingenuity. While heavy bombers like the Lancaster rained destruction from the night skies, the Mosquito struck like a scalpel, fast, precise, and unstoppable. By the end of 1942, Luftwaffe intelligence had classified the Mosquito as a high-priority target. Special orders were issued to intercept them at all costs. But it was a futile command. In battle after battle, the Mosquito simply outran the enemy. Those first encounters over Europe revealed a painful truth for the Germans. The age of the heavy, armored bomber was ending. A new era had begun, one ruled by speed, stealth, and precision. And at the center of it all was a machine born not of steel, but of wood, the Mosquito, the phantom of the skies. By 1943, the phrase, "Zu schnell," too fast, echoed through Luftwaffe radio channels across occupied Europe. It was the frustrated cry of German pilots chasing the one aircraft they could never catch, the de Havilland Mosquito. Every week, Mosquito squadrons struck deeper into German territory. They attacked rail depots in Hamburg, power stations in Cologne, and communication centers across France, all in broad daylight. The Luftwaffe scrambled interceptors again and again, but the outcome was always the same. The British planes appeared suddenly, bombed with terrifying precision, and vanished into the horizon before a single fighter could close in. Pilots described the experience with disbelief. The Mosquito climbed faster than a Bf-109, cruised faster than an FW-190, and at high altitude could simply walk away from any pursuer. German radar stations would barely register them before they were gone. Even the flak gunners, the famed Fliegerbeobachtungen crews, found them impossible to track. "They move like ghosts," one officer wrote in his log. "By the time you aim, they've already gone." The Mosquito's speed was not just a product of its engines. It was a masterpiece of design. Its smooth, wooden surface created almost no drag, and its light frame allowed it to soar higher and accelerate faster than the metal aircraft of its day. While German engineers added armor and weapons to their planes, the Mosquito stripped everything away. It survived not by fighting, but by outrunning. In the skies over France, Luftwaffe pilot Oberleutnant Hans Rocker recalled his first encounter. His radar operator spotted a fast-moving target near Lille. They dove from altitude, engines screaming, but the gap only widened. "It was unbelievable," he wrote later. "Our instruments said we were diving at over 600 kilometers per hour, yet the Mosquito was still pulling away. It was like chasing the wind." The German high command grew desperate. Orders went out to develop special interceptors capable of reaching the Mosquito's speed and altitude. Engineers worked on high-performance versions of the FW-190 and even experimented with rocket-powered Me-163 fighters. But production delays, fuel shortages, and Allied bombing crippled these efforts. Meanwhile, Mosquito crews seemed to fly with impunity. They raided Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, struck Berlin on the anniversary of the Nazi Party's founding, and even interrupted Hermann Göring's speeches, timing their attacks to coincide with his live radio broadcasts. On one infamous day, bombs fell so close to the building where Göring spoke that his broadcast cut off mid-sentence. His rage afterward was volcanic. "I am green with envy of the British Mosquito," he fumed. When I see it fly over, I get furious that the British, who can't even make enough aluminum, can produce a plane that can fly rings around ours. For the pilots who flew it, the Mosquito was more than a machine, it was liberation. They trusted its speed like armor, daring to perform low-level raids that no other bomber could attempt. On one mission over France, a formation of Mosquitoes destroyed a prison wall in Amiens, allowing hundreds of resistance members to escape. Every operation carried risk, but the aircraft's unmatched agility gave them the best odds of survival. By 1944, even as the Luftwaffe began deploying its revolutionary jet fighter, the Me-262, the Mosquito still held its ground. The jets were faster, yes, but too few and too fragile to make a difference. The Mosquito had already proven that a combination of speed, simplicity, and daring could achieve what brute power could not. Zu schnell. The cry became symbolic, a confession that the Luftwaffe's technological might had been outwitted by craftsmanship and imagination. The Germans could see the Mosquito, could even hear its engines screaming past, but they could never reach it. And so the wooden wonder flew on, untouchable, unstoppable, and unforgettable, a living symbol of the moment when ingenuity left the enemy in the dust. By 1943, the Mosquito had evolved from a curiosity into one of the deadliest weapons in the Allied arsenal. No longer just a fast reconnaissance plane, it had become a precision bomber capable of striking deep inside Nazi Germany with surgical accuracy. The Germans, who once laughed at the wooden toy, now called it Die Hölzerne the wooden menace. The RAF's Mosquito squadrons began a new phase of daylight attacks. Bold, low-level raids designed to hit the enemy where it hurt most. While heavy bombers like the Lancaster leveled cities under the cover of night, Mosquitoes went after specific, high-value targets. Gestapo offices, power plants, communication hubs, and even prisons. One of the most famous operations came on September 27, 1942, when a formation of Mosquitoes of No. 105 and 139 squadrons struck the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. The attack was so precise that it destroyed key files on Norwegian resistance fighters while leaving nearby civilian buildings untouched. Not a single Mosquito was lost. Göring was furious. "When I see the Mosquito fly," he said bitterly, "I turn green with envy." The raids continued with breathtaking audacity. In January 1943, Mosquitoes bombed Berlin in broad daylight, not once but twice, timing the strikes to coincide with speeches by Hermann Göring and Joseph Goebbels. The explosions forced German radio networks off the air, humiliating the regime before the entire nation. Göring later admitted, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. The British, with their wooden aircraft, make a mockery of us." As their success grew, Mosquito units expanded across Europe and the Mediterranean. They struck enemy airfields, supply depots, and radar installations. The aircraft's incredible speed allowed them to approach at treetop height, drop their bombs with pinpoint precision, and disappear before anti-aircraft batteries could even react. German observers called them devils that came out of nowhere. But perhaps the most dramatic example of the Mosquito's power came in February 1944, during Operation Jericho, the legendary Amiens prison raid. Flying at just 30 feet above the ground, Mosquito bombers shattered the prison's outer walls and guard barracks, freeing more than 250 French resistance prisoners. The mission was so daring that even Allied commanders doubted it could be done. Yet the Mosquito pilots did it, perfectly timed, perfectly executed. The Germans now understood that the Mosquito was not just fast, it was strategic. It could carry a bomb load nearly equal to the early B-17 Flying Fortress, but at twice the speed and with a fraction of the crew. It could perform the work of a bomber, a fighter, and a spy all in one mission. The Luftwaffe had nothing that could match its versatility. Inside Germany, morale began to crack. Civilians called the Mosquito the Black Death from nowhere. It struck with such precision that rumors spread of supernatural guidance, that the British must have invented some secret radar magic. In truth, it was the skill of its pilots, the reliability of its engines, and the genius of its wooden design. By late 1944, as the Allies pushed toward victory, Mosquitoes flew almost daily over occupied Europe. They escorted bomber streams, guided Pathfinder units through cloud cover, and destroyed key infrastructure ahead of advancing ground troops. Their raids crippled German communication lines and paralyzed troop movements, hastening the collapse of the Reich. The wooden menace had done what no one thought possible. It turned craftsmanship, speed, and precision into a weapon of terror against one of the most powerful air forces in the world. For the men who built it, it was vindication. For those who flew it, it was freedom. And for those who faced it, a reminder that sometimes the deadliest weapon in war is not made of steel, but of imagination. By the autumn of 1943, Adolf Hitler's patience had snapped. Reports from the Luftwaffe were humiliating. Wooden British aircraft darting across German skies at will, bombing vital targets, mocking the Reich's defenses. Göring's once proud Air Force, the symbol of Nazi dominance, was being outflown by a plane made of plywood. Hitler demanded an explanation, and then an order echoed through the halls of the Reich Chancellery. Find a way to destroy the Mosquito. Bring it down at any cost. The Luftwaffe's top engineers and pilots gathered in emergency conferences. How could something made of wood evade the most advanced interceptors in the world? Tests showed that the Mosquito could cruise at altitudes above 30,000 feet, yet still outrun or outclimb nearly every German fighter. Even the feared Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 struggled to reach it. By the time they did, the Mosquito was already gone. Desperate, the Germans began developing specialized interception tactics. Radar controllers were told to predict the Mosquito's routes, while night fighters like the Ju-88G and the He-219 Uhu were fitted with improved radar systems. Some Luftwaffe pilots, like the skilled Helmut Lent and Heinz-Wolfgang Schnaufer, came close to catching them, but even then, success was rare. "They come like ghosts," one German radar operator said. "By the time we see them, they have already vanished." Hitler's rage grew with every failed interception. Göring, embarrassed before his Führer, made wild promises. He ordered the development of faster aircraft, jets, rockets, anything that could match the Mosquito. The result was the birth of the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. But in 1943 and early 1944, production delays and Hitler's obsession with turning the Me 262 into a bomber delayed its true purpose. The Mosquito, meanwhile, kept flying unchallenged. Every new report deepened Hitler's obsession. After each British raid on Berlin, often led by Mosquito Pathfinders, he would lash out in fury. "How can they strike the heart of the Reich with such impunity?" he shouted at his generals. Göring, humiliated, admitted, "The British make the Mosquito out of wood. Our engineers said it was impossible, but it flies circles around us. What a disgrace!" In response, German scientists tried unconventional solutions. They attempted to equip fighters with air-to-air rockets and even tested automatic flak systems that could predict a Mosquito's flight path. None worked. The aircraft's speed and altitude were too unpredictable. Its smooth wooden surface absorbed radar signals, making it one of the first aircraft to demonstrate a kind of stealth effect. By late 1944, the situation had become absurd. The Luftwaffe was burning precious fuel on futile Mosquito chases. Pilots were ordered to take off at the first sign of enemy radar echoes, often to find nothing but empty skies. Many began to call Mosquito interceptions suicide missions. One German ace remarked bitterly, "The Mosquito is not a plane, it's a curse." Still, Hitler persisted. When the British began using Mosquitoes to bomb Gestapo headquarters, power stations, and even radio towers during his speeches, his fury reached new heights. He demanded that the Luftwaffe set traps, bait operations to lure Mosquitoes into ambush zones. But the British intelligence network was too efficient. The traps never worked. The few Mosquitoes that were shot down often fell during bad weather or mechanical failure, not combat. For every one lost, dozens completed their missions and returned safely. The statistics were staggering. By 1944, Mosquito crews were completing missions with loss rates 5 times lower than those of heavy bombers. The myth of invincibility began to grow, and Hitler hated myths he couldn't control. In a desperate move, he reportedly ordered new wooden German aircraft to be developed to fight wood with wood. Projects like the Heinkel He-162 and Ta-154 Mosquito were born from this madness. But rushed engineering and shortages of quality glue led to disasters. Wings collapsing mid-flight, planes catching fire. The Reich's imitation of the Mosquito ended in tragedy. By 1945, the war was turning against Germany. The Mosquito was everywhere, bombing Berlin, photographing V-2 rocket sites, leading Pathfinder formations, and attacking German convoys at night. It was fast, silent, unstoppable. Hitler's order to bring it down had become a bitter joke among Allied airmen. The wooden menace not only survived Hitler's wrath, it humiliated his air force, symbolizing the technological and moral decay of a regime that could no longer keep up. And as the Third Reich crumbled, the Mosquito, the plane Hitler could never catch, flew over the ruins of Berlin, victorious in both the sky and in history. By 1943, the Mosquito was not only a bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, it had become a key instrument in the Allies' intricate web of intelligence and deception. Its unmatched speed, high-altitude capability, and versatility made it the perfect tool for gathering information, misleading the enemy, and shaping the course of the war. British intelligence quickly realized the Mosquito's potential. Reconnaissance variants, stripped of guns and armor, flew deep over German-occupied Europe. Equipped with the latest cameras, they captured high-resolution images of airfields, rail networks, military factories, and V-2 rocket sites. These photographs were vital for planning bombing raids and amphibious assaults, providing the Allies with intelligence that would save countless lives. The Luftwaffe had no idea what was coming. Radar operators would detect high-altitude targets for only a few seconds before they vanished. German anti-aircraft crews reported sightings of tiny silver ghosts that appeared and disappeared without warning. Confusion reigned. The Mosquito's wooden frame absorbed radar signals, making it almost invisible to detection. Its speed made it impossible to intercept reliably. Allied planners took full advantage of this. Mosquitoes were often used to simulate bomber formations, tricking German defenses into preparing for attacks where none would occur. They flew feints over Berlin, Cologne, and other key cities, drawing Luftwaffe fighters away from genuine bomber streams. These deceptions minimized losses for the heavier, slower Lancaster and Halifax bombers, turning the Mosquito into a living instrument of strategic misdirection. One of the most famous examples occurred before the D-Day landings in June 1944. Mosquitoes flew over Normandy and Pas-de-Calais, dropping dummy parachutists, flares, and radar reflectors to convince the Germans that the main invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. The deception worked brilliantly. German forces held back reinforcements, believing the phantom armies and aerial formations were real, giving Allied troops a crucial advantage on the beaches of Normandy. Mosquito crews also delivered intelligence in other ways. Night missions brought back aerial photographs of U-boat pens along the French coast, enabling precision strikes against submarines that had been plaguing Allied convoys. In addition, their speed allowed daring courier missions, carrying critical documents across Europe in hours, something no other aircraft could safely accomplish. For the Luftwaffe, the Mosquito became a nightmare of uncertainty. They could not predict where it would strike, whether it was armed or unarmed, or whether its flight was part of a genuine bombing raid or a diversion. Every encounter bred fear and frustration. Some German pilots called it the invisible enemy or the ghost bomber, while officers in Berlin worried that every flash of silver in the sky might be a reconnaissance plane taking photographs for the next Allied operation. The combination of intelligence and deception amplified the Mosquito's impact far beyond what raw bombing power could achieve. It was not just a plane, it was a force multiplier. Every flight gathered critical information, every raid distracted or misled the enemy, and every photograph informed strategy that would change the course of the war. By the end of 1944, Allied commanders considered the Mosquito indispensable. It was faster than the Luftwaffe's best fighters, stealthy in ways few could comprehend, and able to operate in roles from direct combat to intelligence gathering with equal efficiency. The Wooden Wonder had evolved beyond a weapon into a master of strategy, turning speed and innovation into intelligence and deception into victory. In the skies of Europe, the Mosquito became more than an aircraft. It became a symbol of the ingenuity, courage, and cunning that defined the Allied war effort. Every mission left the Germans guessing, every photograph revealed truths, and every successful raid reinforced one undeniable fact. The Mosquito was the ultimate ghost in the sky. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, the de Havilland Mosquito had already secured its place in history. From its humble beginnings in the workshops of Hatfield to its legendary raids over occupied Europe, the Wooden Wonder had proven that speed, precision, and ingenuity could triumph over brute force. The Mosquito's achievements were remarkable. It had flown thousands of missions, daylight raids, night bombing, reconnaissance, and pathfinder operations, with a loss rate far lower than that of any other Allied bomber. Factories, rail yards, Gestapo headquarters, and even prisons had fallen to its precision strikes. It was a plane that could adapt to any role and survive missions that would have destroyed other aircraft. Beyond its tactical impact, the Mosquito changed the way people thought about aviation. Its wooden frame, once dismissed as a flaw, had become a feature lightweight, fast, and radar-absorbing. Engineers and pilots marveled at its versatility, and militaries around the world took note. The plane's design philosophy, speed over armor, ingenuity over brute force, influenced post-war aircraft development for decades. The men who flew it remembered it with reverence. Pilots described the Mosquito as part aircraft, part miracle, a machine that demanded skill, trust, and daring. Its handling was precise, almost alive, responding to every movement of the stick and rudder. Crews who survived missions over Berlin or Amiens carried the stories of their exploits home, inspiring future generations of aviators. The Mosquito's fame spread beyond Britain. Allied commanders recognized it as one of the most efficient and innovative warplanes ever built. Even German pilots, who had once chased it in vain, admitted its superiority. Luftwaffe reports called it the enemy we could never catch, a ghost that humiliated one of the world's most feared air forces. After the war, Mosquitoes continued to serve in roles from training to reconnaissance in countries including Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands. Its legacy extended into the jet age, influencing the design of high-speed reconnaissance aircraft and multi-role fighters. The principles of lightweight construction and aerodynamic efficiency, proven in the Mosquito, became standard in modern aviation. But perhaps its greatest legacy was symbolic. The Mosquito showed that innovation, courage, and imagination could overcome material shortages, bureaucratic skepticism, and the most formidable enemy. A wooden aircraft, born in a small factory, had flown rings around the mightiest machines of its time. It was a testament to human ingenuity that even in the darkest hours, creativity could change the course of a war. In museums today, preserved Mosquitos stand as silent witnesses to history. Their polished wooden fuselages, twin Merlin engines, and graceful wings tell the story of a plane that outran enemies, defied expectations, and transformed aerial warfare. Visitors can trace the scratches, rivets, and repairs, marks of a machine that lived in combat, yet always came home. The Mosquito story continues to inspire. Engineers study its structure, pilots learn from its precision, and historians marvel at its impact. In every sense, it was more than a plane. It was a symbol of ingenuity over fear, of daring over convention, and of speed over destruction. The wooden wonder earned its name, and its legend will endure for as long as humans look to the skies and dream. As the last Mosquito engines fell silent, one truth remained clear. A wooden aircraft, built from birch, balsa, and glue, had outflown the impossible, and in doing so had secured a legacy that no enemy, no war, and no passage of time could ever erase.